By the end of this video, when we talk to our NPCs, hello there young man, they'll be able to ask us questions. Can you help? But not only that, we'll be able to answer. Yes, I can help you, old man. Thanks. I knew you'd help. Oh, what a nice guy. Let's try talking to this girl. Hi, do you need something? No. Are you sure? I don't know. Well, I'm too busy. Bye. Kind of rude, push me out of the way as well. Let's get talking to our NPCs and adding dialogue options. So right now, the UI for our dialogue panel, being our text and dialogue portrait and NPC names that we pass in, are all held on our NPCs script. You see, we have to pass in the UI on each one of our NPCs. So every time we made one, we'd have to pass in these details. That's a bit silly, so we're going to tidy that up. I have this game controller object, which holds all our miscellaneous controllers used across our game. So on here, I'm going to right click and go create empty. I'm going to name this DialogueController. I'm going to click add component and add a new script, which I'll also call DialogueController. Double click on this to open it up. Now, if we go to our NPC script, we can see at the top, we've got all these UI variables. If we cut them out by pressing Ctrl X of this NPC script, then go back to our DialogueController, we can paste these on at the top. Hover over and import using Text Mesh Pro, and also for our image, hover over and we're going to want Unity Engine UI. Cool, and above this, so we can call this DialogueController from any script, we're going to want a public static DialogueController instance, and go curly braces, get semicolon private set. This is called a singleton instance. To set this up in our start, we'll say if instance is equal to null, then instance equals this, else destroy brackets game object. So this makes sure there's only one instance of this DialogueController, since we only want one in our game. And instead of start, I'm actually going to switch this to be in awake, so this happens as soon as our game starts. Cool, so we're not going to want this update function, but we're going to want to quickly write some functions that lets us set up this UI from our script. So a public void show dialogue UI, and we'll pass in a bool called show. And this will simply set our dialog panel set active to be show, so either true or false. So we can toggle between the UI's visibility. We'll want a public void set NPC info, and we'll pass in a string of the NPC name and a sprite for the portrait. Then we'll set nameText.text to equal our NPC name, and we'll set portraitImage.sprite to equal portrait. Cool, and finally for now, we'll do a public void set dialog text, pass in our text, and we'll set dialog text.text to equal text. Cool, so now if we go to our NPC script, you can see we've got all these red underlines where we've moved our UI out. At the top, we can add a private DialogueController, which I'll call dialog UI, and then add a start function where we go dialog UI equals DialogueController.instance. Now let's go down our script and replace all our red underlines to use the new functionality. So the name text and the portrait image, we've got our DialogueUI.setNPCinfo, where we'll pass in this dialogdata.npc name. And you can copy and paste this from above. I'm copying where the portrait is, so dialogdata NPC portrait. Now we can remove those lines and we've got our new function. Then DialogueUI.showDialogueUI, and we'll pass in true. So we can remove this dialog panel set active true. Cool, that looks much tidier. Let's keep going down. We've got our dialog text being set. So let's go DialogueUI.setDialogText and pass in the variable text from above. Remove this line. Scroll on down. We again want this DialogueUI set dialog text. So I'm just going to replace this here with our DialogueUI set dialog text. We want to clear that out. To do this one, we're going to go DialogueUI set dialog text, and inside here, we're actually going to want to call the DialogueUI.dialogText, since that's a public variable in there, .text, and plus equals on that letter. Cool, that matches up. In one more spot, we're again going to want this set dialog text, where we'll set it to empty again, and then we'll want DialogueUI, show DialogueUI to be false. Okay, very cool. Let's go to Unity. And now you can see we've got our slots for our dialog UI that we'll only have to drag in once. So let's drag in the dialog panel the dialogue text, the name text, and the portrait. Cool, now if we check our NPCs, the only thing we have to pass in is our dialogue data. Cool, now it's all tidy. We can start adding our dialogue choices. So speaking of this dialogue data, let's first add some new data into this scriptable object. So inside our scripts, go NPC dialogue, double click on this, and outside of this class, I'm going to add a new square brackets system.serializable and make a public class called dialogue choice. And we'll want a public int for our dialogue index. And this index points to the index of our dialogue lines where we're asking a question or where choices should appear. Then we'll want a public string array, so square brackets, of choices, which is our player's response options, and a public int array for our next dialogue indexes. So after the player has chosen a response, which dialogue line do we display next? Then up in our NPC dialog, we're going to want a public dialogue choice array, which we'll call choices. Cool, so to get an idea of how this sets up, let's go back to Unity. We'll go to our old man folder and select our old man dialog scriptable object. We can now see we've got all our original dialogue here, but we've also got our new choices section. So if we add a new one of these and open it up, I'll show you how to set this up. So let's edit one of his dialogue lines to be a question. So in element 1, I'll just get him to say, "Can you help?" So we're going to want some options to appear for our player to respond to this "can you help?" So our dialogue index here needs to match the element in this dialogue lines. So that's number 1 as it's element 1. We can now add some choices. So let's keep it simple and add 1 for yes and 1 for no. And now for this next dialogue indexes, we're going to want to point at some new dialogue lines. So when I say yes, what does the old man say? And when I say no, what does he say? So let's add another element here. For when we say yes, he can say, "Thanks." And if we say no, you can say, "Oh, okay." So we're going to want to point to element number 2 when we say yes. So next dialogue indexes, element 0 will match up with element 0 here. So when we say yes, we're going to want to point to number 2, and we'll add another one for no. When we say no, we want to point to element number 3. Very cool, very easy. Now if we left it at that, it would look something like this, where our old man will say, "Can you help?" And we'll say yes, and he'll say thanks. But then if we continue, he also says, "Oh, okay," which was our reply from saying no. We don't want to see both answers. After we've responded here and said yes, and he goes to thanks, we don't want it to then continue to our next line in our dialogue, which is how our script currently flows. Once we've said yes to his question, we want it to go to thanks, but right now how our script works, it automatically runs to the next line as well. To keep this simple, all I want it to do is end after he's replied to our response. To do this, I'm going to go back to our dialogue script in NPC dialog. And as we've got these auto progress lines, to say when we want a line to automatically go to the next, I'm going to duplicate this with Control D and call this EndDialogueLines. With this array, we'll be able to mark where our dialogue is meant to end. So if we go back to Unity and take a look, we can see we have this EndDialogueLines. We're going to want 4 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4, to match our dialogue lines. And we want it to end after thanks. And we also want it to end on, "Oh, okay," which it would automatically do since it is the last one in our dialogue lines. But I'll tick it anyway, just for clarity. And in case we add another line afterwards, we don't want to forget that this would be an end to our conversation. If you didn't want the conversation to end here, so you want him to say thanks and then something else, you could say, "Thanks, I knew you'd help." Make sure this is within the same line so we don't have "oh, okay" interrupting. We then add another element on for our "oh, okay." Untick thanks, so this is no longer an end in dialogue, and then tick element 3, so he'd say, "I knew you'd help," and we wouldn't go into this "oh, okay." Then let's say we want him to say something after "oh, okay." So he says, "Maybe next time." We add another element in EndDialogueLines, untick "oh, okay." So now if we say yes, he says, "Thanks, I knew you'd help," and then it would end, or he says, "Oh, okay, maybe next time." And we'll stop that for now because there's a lot of customizable options, but hopefully you can see what I mean on how to use this EndDialogueLines. But cool, let's get to the meat of adding our choices in. So of course we're going to need some UI for our choices. So in our dialog panel, I'm going to right click and go UI panel, as we're going to add a new panel here called Choices Panel. Cool, I'm just going to click and center this to the middle so we can edit this position. I'm going to set its width to be 200, its height to be 120, and its position to be 360 on the X and -75 on the Y, so that it sits just below our close button here. In fact, I can go a bit higher, -50. And I'll scroll down and click Add Component, And we'll want to add a vertical layout group. And I'm going to untick Child Force Expand and set Child Alignment to Upper Center. Cool, we're using this vertical layout group. Now when we right click on Choice Panel, go UI and add a button, which will represent our choice button. So let's call this Choice Button. If we add multiple choices in here, they'll all stack vertically. We're going to be writing the script so that our choice buttons are prefabs and will be dynamically loaded in. So maybe you'll only have one option come up, that's fine. Maybe you'll have 4 choices, these will all appear. So it'll be completely modular. The top of our choice button, I'm going to set the width to be 200 so it matches this width, and the height to be a bit bigger, so 60. Just to stylize it, I'm going to set the color to black, open our choices button and go to our text and set the color to be white, and I'll leave everything the same. Of course you can customize this how you like. Cool, now when we add more buttons, this will expand. It looks like we can fit about 3 on here. Of course you can make your buttons smaller. And for our choices panel, I don't actually want a background for this, I just want the buttons to appear. So I'm going to set the alpha on our choices panel to be 0. And now we just have our little buttons appear. Cool, so like I said, we want our buttons to be prefab, so I'm going to go to our prefab folder and drag our choice button into here. Then we can delete this from our hierarchy, as we'll be adding these in our script. Now of course, since this is UI, it's going to go in our DialogueController script, which handles all our dialogues UI. So let's go back to our DialogueController, and at the top we're going to want a public transform for our choice container, which is that panel, and a public game object for our choice button. Scroll down, and at the bottom we can write a function for a public void clear choices, as we're going to want to be able to clear out those buttons, where we can say for each brackets transform child in choice container, so any children within our choice panel, we're going to destroy the child.gameObject. So that'll destroy all our buttons for us. And we only need one more function, which will be a public game object called create choice button. We're going to pass in the choice text, and we're also going to pass in a Unity engine .events.Unity action, so we can tell it what to be in the onClick. As in our NPC script, we're going to decide which is the next index to move to, but that's where we'll handle the logic of what goes in our onClick. So let's create a new game object for our choice button. And of course we've named the one at the top choice button, so let's actually rename this to be choice button prefab, so we can clarify between those two. And then back down on our choice button, we'll go instantiate choice button prefab, comma, choice container. So we're creating a new version of our choice button prefab inside our choice panel. Then on our choice button, we're going to go get component in children, and in triangle brackets pass in TextMeshPro underscore text, so we can grab the .text from our button and set this to equal our choice text. Then we'll want choice button .get component and pass in button, then set our .onClick.add listener and pass in our onClick. And finally we'll return this choice button. So cool, we'll set up our button and return it back from this function. Let's go back to Unity, and on our dialog controller we need to add our choice container, which is our choices panel, and our choice button prefab. So go to our prefab folder and drag in our choice button. Very cool, UI all set up. Let's go on one of our NPCs and open up our NPC script. So in our script, when we interact, we start our dialogue if it's not currently active, and we call a coroutine called typeLine. Type out our dialogue line, then we call next line. We go to our next line function, and in this next line, we're going to set up some bits for our choices. So let's take a look. We're typing out our line, and here's where we skip our typing animation and show the full line. Under here, there's a few new things we want to do. First, we're going to clear out any existing choices. We're then going to check our new end dialogue lines to see if we want to end the dialogue here. If we don't want to end the dialogue there, we're going to want to check if we have any choices for this line, and if we do, we'll display them. So cool, to clear out our choices, we can use our dialog UI.clearChoices, which we previously wrote, so it clears out any existing button. Oh, let's remove this else from this if else. Now let's check if we want to end our dialogue here. So we'll go if DialogueData.endDialogueLines.length is greater than dialogue index, and our DialogueData.endDialogueLines is the dialogue index, so we just pass in our dialogue index. So we're going to grab the boolean of the index that we've ticked. If it is ticked, we're going to call endDialogue and then return. So we exit out of this function, if I can spell it right. Oh my god, return. Cool. That's all we need for our end dialogue lines. Now let's check if we have any dialogue choices by going for each dialogue choice in DialogueData.choices if DialogueChoice.DialogueIndex equals our dialog index. We're going to want to display our choices, and then we'll return out. So we're going to write a new function for displaying our choices. If we scroll on down, I'll do this above EndDialogue and add a void display choices, and we'll pass in a dialog choice called choice. Now we'll go for int I equals 0. I is less than choice.choices and I++, or we want choice.choices.length. Then inside here we'll go int next index equals choice.next dialog index and pass in I, so we know where this choice is going to lead. And then we use our dialog UI to go dot create choice button and pass in choice.choices square brackets I, comma, and now we need to pass in the onClick event. So we actually need to create a function for this onClick event, which makes it so when we click on this button, it'll display the correct line of the next index. So below this, let's go void choose option and pass in the int next index. We're going to set dialog index to equal next index. Dialog UI will clear the choices, and then I'm actually going to write a new function here called void display current line, where we stop all coroutines and then start a coroutine for our type line. Now I'll show you all the places this goes. Inside our choose option, we're going to call display current line. So this forces everything to stop running. So all text will stop typing and we'll go to the next line. Everywhere that we call this type line, I'm going to replace this with display current line so that we stop coroutines and then start coroutine. Otherwise, we can have errors where two coroutines are running at the same time. So you'll hear like typing sound effects and text will get all muddled up. So we'll keep it clean with this display current line. And also at the very top, we've got another where we start our dialogue. Maybe you open and close one really quick. We don't want that to break, so we'll use display current line. So we stop our coroutine and then start the new one. Cool, so this choose option is the function we want to be called when we press our button. So in this create choice button, we're going to go brackets equals greater than and paste in choose option brackets and pass in our next index. So this passes the function in for us. Cool, so now we have our display choices. Let's scroll back up, and inside where we're checking if our choices are ready to be displayed, we can call display choices. Inside of parameters, add in dialog choice. And very nice, and guess what? That's all we need. Let's go back to Unity, click on our dialog panel and close this back off. And if we go to our old man's dialog one more time, let's check what we want to see. So it has to go, hello there young man, can you help? Which is going to be a question. If we say yes, it's going to go to number 2 and it'll say thanks, I knew you'd help, and it'll end on number 3. Oh, we actually didn't change this. If we say no, we want it to go to element number 4 and say, oh, okay. So let's make sure that's changed. Good thing I came to check it again. And he'll say, oh, okay, maybe next time, and we'll end on number 5. We can add in our auto progress lines as well. I think I'll have them all manually moving. Our first one can auto progress, sure, we'll leave that as it is. But the others, I'll keep waiting. So cool, let's press play. If we walk up to our old man, we can press E. Can you help? Now I get our 2 options. So let's be kind, let's say yes. And he says thanks. Oh, I pressed E too fast. I knew you'd help is the second thing that he said. Okay, we say yes and he says thanks. I knew you'd help. And then it closes on down. Perfect, it doesn't keep going. Let's try again. Can you help? We'll say no. Oh, okay. Maybe next time. Oh, very cool. Now for another example, let's go to our NPC girl. And as she's running around and in a rush, she says, hi, do you need something? So that's a question. Let's add a choice. That's element number 1. And we'll say yes or no. And if I say yes, you can say, well, I'm too busy. Bye. And that can be the end. So let's set up number 2 to be the end. We'll also have everything auto progressing, so she'll keep the conversation moving on her own. So yes will point to, well, I'm too busy, which is number 2. If we say no, I'm going to make it another question, and she'll say, are you sure? So that's number 4. So we say no, we point to number 4. That's another question, so I'm going to add another to our choices. Let me close this one down and open this up. So number 4, she's asking a question. Oh, actually, I'll put this on element 3. Are you sure? And no needs to go to 3. Okay, so she says, do you need something? And we say no. Number 3, are you sure? So we're on dialogue number 3. Let's go number 3, and here she asks a question. Our choices, we can keep it as yes or no, or actually let's say, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And then maybe we say, I don't know. Like, are you sure? I don't know. I don't know if I need something or not. And now for our next dialogue indexes. If I say, yes, I'm sure, we'll add another one and she'll say, okay, bye. Very friendly, that's number 4. Yes, I'm sure. Okay, bye. If we say, I don't know, maybe we'll go back and say, well, I'm too busy. Bye. So let's send it back to element 2. For ending the dialogue lines, we don't want it to end on are you sure, but we do want it to end on okay, bye. And we'll keep it ending on well, I'm too busy, bye. And we'll keep them all auto-progressing again. Cool, now we've got 2 questions in one conversation. Take a look and see how this works. We'll go up to our girl. She says, hi, do you need something? I'll say, yes, well, I'm too busy, bye. And she runs off. I didn't even press a button. I'll talk to her again. Do you need something? No. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. Okay, bye. Or if I say, hi, do you need something? And I'll say, no. Are you sure? I don't know. Well, I'm too busy. Bye. Haha, a branching dialogue tree. Very simple and very easy. But of course, if we go up to our old man again, he says, can you help? And I say, yes, I can. Now if I talk to him again, he keeps saying, can you help? We need our NPCs to remember our answers. Let's hope I figure out how to do that in a nice and easy way, because that's going to be our next video. At some point, that old man's going to be giving us a quest. So we'll look at conditional dialogue options, along with beginning our quest system in the next video. So like and subscribe so you don't miss out. To skip all the effort, you can grab our whole template, this whole project, which includes all our finished features, as well as any future updates for free. Or to grab all the scripts I've ever written on this whole channel, you can join our Patreon, and you can help support the channel. So thank you to all current Patreons as well. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!